Hi guys, and welcome to the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to focus so much on everything interviews and acing your interviews. Now, fashion interviews are designed in such a way that businesses interact with talents to determine if they're a great fit for their business. Sometimes these interviews are physical, but in today's world, virtual interviews are now here to stay. However, whether it is physical or virtual, there are still some do's and don'ts you have to follow and adhere to. Let us talk about the do's. In a fashion interview, you actually want to look your best. Let me ask you, how do I look? Nice, right? Now imagine if I was in an interview. First impression really matters. Now, when I'm saying first impression, I'm not asking you to get the best weave, to get a makeup artist to do your face, to go and buy like the most expensive attire. No, usually less is more. However, you have to put yourself together in such a very simple and presentable way. Clean hair, bright face, bright smile. You don't have your lips cracking. You have like a very simple balm on at the least. You're wearing a nice outfit. Now remember, colors goes a long way. They say that there's a psychology with colors or to colors. So you want to make sure you're wearing something that is not intrusive, distracting, something simple. One of the colors that is very common in the fashion industry is black or white or any neutral color. So you might want to stay in that space. However, if you're going to do any bright color, you can keep it bold, avoid many patterns, avoid many shapes, and avoid symbols and signs on your shirt that can spring up questions that you are not prepared for. That said, you also want to ensure that you have good network. Like, this is non-negotiable. Because many interviews now go on virtual platforms, businesses don't have the patience. Of course, they might, permit 1 or 2 times your network is fluctuating. But one thing you need to do is to ensure that your network is good. One of the best things you can actually add or do is to have a plan B in terms of internet provider and quickly switch. But remember to take excuse before you switch. Now, you also want to ensure you have a good background. You cannot be in a bus and be attending an interview. Neither can you be in a market. I remember this time when there's this young girl applying for an internship role, and she was in a mom's shop. A mom sells textiles in Lagos Island. And I think that was actually admirable. That's something that should have interested the recruiter or the company we were recruiting for. However, while she was talking in the interview, she say, "Sorry, please hold on," and speak in Yoruba and tell them the figure of the garment and say, no, that's not the price. Negotiating. And then she comes back and says, "Oh, so sorry, yo." And she keeps speaking. I remember this other instance where the talent was actually on her POP. She just completed her NYC. And like I always say, there's nothing wrong with that because she was wearing the complete NYC regalia. However, in the course of the interviews, because she went to hide in the bus to, get a quiet environment, her friends would open the window and say, "Let her get the job, oh." And in my mind, I'm like, that is so bad. It's important that you're able to communicate with those around you to sort of give you room and time to give your best during interviews. Avoid distractions. No phone ringing out if people have to be there. No doors cringing. No lights going on and off. These are some of the things that can actually distract you and your interviewer. I've talked about your looks. I've talked about lighting. I've talked about network. I'm also going to talk about your demeanor. Now, if you know that the roles you're applying for are things that, you have never explored before, it's okay to be tensed. However, you have to learn to deflect. In football, you know what deflection is? When the goalkeeper kicks the ball and it hits the pole, it doesn't go into the post. What am I saying? You have to find the kind of things that you can do. Your hand gesture, touching your ear, taking a deep breath, gestures that would help you calm down in the course of the interview so that you don't mess yourself up. I remember this girl in an interview, we were asking her questions and it seemed that it became really tensed for her. And then she just used a swear word, SHIT. Guess what? That can be very off-putting because people are probably thinking, what if you're interacting with a customer and the customer says something you don't like and you use the same word. Those are some of the things that you should avoid in an interview. Now, preparing for an interview implies that you applied for the job, you were shortlisted, you were informed, pre-informed, a date was picked, a time was scheduled, which means that you have enough time, even if it's just all night, to research the company hiring. Many times we find talents don't even know about the company. They say we can't find a website, but they're on social media. One thing I always say to talent is there is no fashion business today that does not have a social media platform. Now, as much as on their social media, you might not find vision, mission, values, ethos, who our target audience are. If you interact with their posts and read people's comments, you should be able to get a grasp of what the brand is about. And you should be able to answer questions sufficiently that will help you ace your interview. Now, it's important that you do your research. That's my point. Find the company, go through their profile. When did they join social media? How long have they been existing? Who is the founder of this company? Most founders have their own personal pages. Some of them have their office addresses online as well. A few businesses have websites. It might not be very active, but you'll find details of what they do online. Let me use a business, Banke Coco. Banke Coco started as a designer, I think between 2018 and 2019, but launched their brand in 2021, pardon me. One thing is clear, if I'm in an interview with Banke Coco, I would actually interact with her journey in the fashion space, how she moved from one education certification to another, and eventually starting a brand. I would look at the kind of people Banke Coco as a brand has worked with. I know very well, for one, that she had Gabrielle Union as one of her influencers at some point. Now, these are some of the things that you can chip in the course of your interview, and also talk about the uniqueness of her textiles. Having said this, there are a few things you should also avoid in an interview. Touching parts of your body that are not necessarily decent, picking your nose, hissing, using swear words, fidgeting with your gadget, be it a laptop or your phone. Aside that, it would be very obvious when you are giving statistics and figures that are not true. So avoid that completely. There was a talent I was coaching who I asked a very simple question. How many trousers have you made since you've been sewing? And he said, maybe like 200 though. And I said, that's very true. Or that's very possible, I mean to say. But how long have you been sewing? And he said, a year ago. That sort of didn't tally. Because if you're not working for a company that mass produces, how have you been able, all by yourself, to make 200 pieces of trousers or 200 pant trousers excellently well? So what I asked him was to give a range. With a range, you're able to sell yourself well. Also, for example, if you're a social media manager, how many followers have joined a platform or a brand that you worked with? What was their conversion rate in terms of sales? For example, you say, I joined company Lagbaja in 2022, and between 2022 and early 2024 when I left, the followers increased from 2,000 to 10,000 followers. That is good figures. Our sales increased by 40%. That is also good figures. Our interactions with our posts increased by 150%. That is absolutely true, based on the numbers and figures that you shared. Well, that is absolutely possible. I hope I've been able to share with you a few tips to ace your interviews. There's so much more, and I'm sure you can find them online. But remember, in your local industry, you need to also identify the kind of questions that recruiters want to know. Some of the questions they will ask you is, why should we hire you for this role? What is unique about yourself that you're bringing on board? If you were to join this company today, what are the first 2-3 things you would like to execute? What do you find difficult when working with people? And there are many more other questions. If you are enrolled in this course, it also means that you are eligible to join the mock interviews that we'll put together, and the date and time will be communicated to those that have enrolled for this course. Now that we've touched on resumes, CVs, cover letters, we've touched on researching jobs and the importance of researching for jobs. We've also talked about interviews and how to ace your interviews, which we can go on and talk about using all kinds of case studies. I'm sure you have a grasp about this model. Now I'm going to see you in the next model. I can't wait. See you there.